Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's meeting. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for making time today during your busy Wednesday to join us for this Bay Nature talk. Before we begin, I'd just like to invite everyone who's able to please turn your cameras on. It would be great to see you if you're in a position where you can do that. I would just like to introduce our events program really quickly. My name is Leah, and I'm the event coordinator at Bay Nature. Many of you probably know Bay Nature as a quarterly print publication that publishes seasonal print magazines all about nature and conservation content all around the Bay Area. We're a local publication, and we focus only on the 9 counties of the Bay Area. But in addition to our print content, we also have online content that comes out on a weekly basis. And we're also working on building up our events program, which is in the form of these sorts of virtual events, as well as in-person hikes, bio blitzes, and other outings. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us today and supporting our event program. And I'm just really excited for today's guest speaker. We have Matthew Bettelheim, and I'll turn it over to Matthew to introduce himself and introduce today's event.
Thanks, Leah. I'm Matthew Bettelheim. I'm a certified wildlife biologist, a science writer who's written for Bay Nature and other outlets, and a natural historian. I've been studying Western pond turtles for over 20 years, and my interests with Western pond turtles are twofold. First of all, I'm really interested in the natural history, but secondly, I'm also really interested in the history of the species, in particular, the historical terrapin market that took place between the Gold Rush and the Great Depression, in which 500,000 or more turtles were collected from the wild and shipped to San Francisco as an item for consumption. My writing and my research on the species has dabbled and floated between those two topics. And today's talk, which I'm really excited to share with you, is going to be broken out into 3 different parts. The first one, a micro-documentary that celebrates the natural history of the species. The second part, we're going to go over an illustrated guide that I made that will help the public and professionals distinguish between red-eared sliders and Western pond turtles. And lastly, an identification demonstration that will use iNaturalist to test some of the skills that hopefully we've learned during this talk. So first off, we'll look at the micro-documentary. Over the years, I've adopted a more observational approach to my studies during my time in the field, and I've tried to take time to simply stop and watch Western pond turtles. And doing so has allowed me to capture a lot of their natural history on film. At one point, I was sitting in a hunting tree blind trying to catch Western pond turtles nesting on the ground. This hands-off approach has given me opportunities to see a lot of different natural history moments in their life. I've watched a female Western pond turtle wander through a meadow in a summer day during a rainstorm as she looked for a place to nest. I've had a female wander over to me within 5 feet and try to construct a nest in the ground while I was hiding underneath some coyote brush. And I've even spent enough time, as crazy as it might sound, learning to distinguish the sound of a pond turtle moving through the tules, enough so that I could distinguish between them and a snake and a lizard and a bird. And hone that skill enough that I was able to predict where they're going to pop up out of the tules in the lake and emerge to nest on the shoreline. So by taking the time to watch and listen, I'd like to think that I earned their trust over the years, enough so to capture most of what I've witnessed on film. And with the help of a former Bay Nature staffer, Tracy Held, and voice actor David Wynn, I was able to turn all this footage into a micro documentary. So with that, I'd like to share with you the first part here, Western pond turtles between 2 shells. I'm going to pull up that video right now.
This is the western pond turtle, one of the few native freshwater turtles in America found west of the Sierra Nevada and Cascade Mountain ranges along the Pacific coast. They can be found between British Columbia and Baja California, throughout portions of Oregon, Washington, and California in creeks, streams, and ponds. Previously treated as a single species, the western pond turtle complex includes 2 species. The northwestern pond turtle, whose range extends from British Columbia into the San Francisco Bay Area and the Central Valley of California, and the southwestern pond turtle, found from Central California's southern coast ranges south into Baja California. Female western pond turtles can often be distinguished from males using certain markings. Typically, mature females have a blunt snout and speckled chin and neck. The snout of a mature male is markedly more pointed, and the chin and neck is less speckled and paler. Despite certain physical markings like coloration that help biologists distinguish between the two species in the field, both species of western pond turtles share much in common. The natural range of both species overlaps in portions of the San Francisco Bay Area, and the natural history of both species is very much alike. A turtle's shell consists of bony plates that are protected by keratinous scutes, or shields, a material similar to the human fingernail. As a turtle grows, so does their shell and the overlying scutes. The scutes grow by depositing a growth ring, or growth annuli, which typically takes place once each year. Until western pond turtles reach between 12 and 16 years, these growth rings can be used to determine a turtle's age, the same way one counts tree rings. In the wild, western pond turtles can reach up to 55 years. Throughout their natural range, western pond turtles can be found in freshwater habitats like ponds, lakes, creeks, streams, and rivers. Such waters provide a protected place to forage for food or escape from predators by diving beneath a submerged log or undercut bank. Wherever they're found, western pond turtles can be seen throughout the day basking along the shoreline, up on an exposed rock or log, or swimming at the water's surface, sometimes using the surrounding vegetation for cover. Basking allows cold-blooded turtles to regulate their body temperature and to absorb UV rays necessary to produce vitamin D, which helps them grow and maintain strong bones. In more urban areas, western pond turtles can be found in parks and artificial ponds where they're often seen with non-native turtles, like the red-eared slider. Common in the pet trade, red-eared sliders are frequently released into the wild when they are no longer wanted. Non-native turtles can compete with the native western pond turtles for key resources like food and basking habitat, and can introduce foreign diseases to the native turtle population. Although western pond turtles can be active year-round, in the spring and summer, turtle activity increases as the weather warms. Adult male turtles court potential mates with a ritualized performance. This performance consists of the male positioning himself in front of the female and then waving his forearms across her field of view. If the female swims away, the male will reposition himself before her and begin the dance again. If their courtship is successful, the pair will mate. Mating takes place underwater with the male behind, but resting atop the female's domed carapace. The indented curvature of the male's plastron, as well as the firm grip with his foreclaws, helps the couple stay together, despite the seemingly awkward limitations presented by their shells. Depending on her age and the size of her shell, anywhere from 1 to 13 eggs can develop inside of a mature female western pond turtle. As spring turns to summer, climatic clues induce the female to leave the protection of the water and venture up onto land in search of a place to construct her nest. In the late afternoon, on into evening, gravid females will march through dense strands of tules, open fields, and densely vegetated woods in search of a suitable clearing or open ground, whose combination of shade and sun exposure will ensure the success of the developing eggs. Once she's selected a site, The female will empty her bladder to dampen the soil. Then, sight unseen, she will scrape the hard ground and then scoop out a pear-shaped cavity in the earth with only her hind legs. If at any time she encounters a rock or a root too difficult to work around, she may be forced to abandon that nest site in search of another. But if her bladder is empty, she is frightened by a possible predator, or the night draws on too long, she may be forced to abandon her nest attempt altogether and return several days later to start again. If she is successful in digging a suitable nest, she will position herself over the opening and lay her eggs one by one, using her hind legs to position each egg in the nest. When she's done, she will sweep up any loose damp soil and vegetation with her hind legs and work it into the mouth of the nest chamber to create an adobe nest plug. After tamping the plug down with her plastron, the nest becomes unremarkable as she walks away, well camouflaged to any passerby. In the nest, the eggs will incubate and develop over 90 to 120 days before they are ready to hatch. When they emerge from their shells, hatchlings no bigger than a quarter dig out of the nest chamber in search of a watery home. There, the young will take refuge in the warm, shallow waters where they'll forage for food and grow toward adulthood. Western pond turtles are dietary generalists. Their omnivorous diets include everything from vegetable matter like algae, plant roots and flowers, to invertebrates, small fish, amphibian tadpoles and egg masses, and scavenged carrion. Habitat loss, droughts, and the introduction of non-native species, like eastern bullfrogs, increase population vulnerability for western pond turtles. The already small population of northwestern pond turtles in Washington experienced a sharp population decline in 1990 as a result of an upper respiratory disease. Meanwhile, southwestern pond turtles continue to decline in response to drought conditions and reduced wetland habitat. In recent years, state and federal natural resource agencies have begun collaborating with zoos and researchers to better understand the factors threatening western pond turtles and to develop a strategy towards protecting them. If current trends continue, both species run the risk of possible extinction in less than 100 years. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducted an assessment of both species across their range and proposed listing them as threatened. In the meantime, these resilient reptiles must rely on the best protection nature has afforded them: 2 shells. But a shell protects 1 turtle at a time. The rest is in our hands.
All right. So there's the video. Hopefully there's some footage there that folks haven't seen before. So now I'd like to move on to the illustrated guide that I prepared. It has disappeared. So let me open that again really quick. Give me 1 sec. I've lost the file, even though it was shortcutted on my dashboard. Something's always got to happen, right?
And we have some nice questions in the chat already. Please.
Sure. Oh, good.
One person says, amazing video footage.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Back up and running. So here is the, I trust everyone can see that. Here's the guide that I put together. And I'll give you just a really quick backstory. During COVID, I had nothing better to do, so I challenged myself to identify as many Western pond turtles, or turtles, California turtle observations on iNaturalist as I could. And while I was doing that along the way, I realized that Brian Accord with California Fish and Game, Brian and his team were doing the same thing. They were trying to identify all the different pond turtles and distinguish them from sliders. So between ourselves, we began tagging each other in iNaturalist and bouncing identification tricks off each other. And eventually we realized we'd hit upon enough diagnostic tricks that we could create a cheat sheet. And we realized it would be really helpful for professionals and lay people alike to have access to these same clues that we were using. Especially when it comes to melanistic male sliders. So remember, pond sliders are turtles that have entered California and spread around the globe through the pet trade. People bring them in as little hatchlings. They grow really big, and then people don't want to take responsibility for raising them anymore, and they release them into creeks and ponds. And they have an effect on the native species. But it's really important to be able to distinguish between the two species and melanistic males, which means males that they become darker with age. It's a characteristic that you see in males in particular. It can be really tricky to distinguish between a traditional Western pond turtle. So let's review the guide and take a look at some of the clues that we came up with and see if we can't help share how to tell the two apart. So Western pond turtles are on the left, common pond sliders are on the right. I'm not going to hit the first little blurb there. We went over the natural history, but pond turtles are expected in California. Sliders should not be. That's what's most important there. Starting from essentially tip to toe, looking at the head of Western pond turtle, they have a low profile eyes. They are aligned with or below the top of the head. Whereas on a common slider, they're protuberant. They are aligned slightly above the top of the head. They can be bulgy. They can pop out. And actually, this is a really good thing to point out. These are all guidelines. These are general observations. They're usually true. And there's two clues here that I'm going to point out that are mostly infallible. But what I challenge everyone to do is when you use this, you're looking for the bulk of the data pushing one way or the other, because turtles, just like anything else in the wild, are variable, and some might have more enhanced or degraded qualities that we're describing here. So you want to look for the accumulation of data, not just one, because sometimes that one thing that you clue in on might be hard. Or to be honest, turtles rarely pose in the beautiful photographs that I have here. They're usually off in the distance, they flush quickly, and they're showing you an oblique angle that doesn't show any of the clues that I'm going to teach you today. So you want to be able to learn some or all of these so that you can make meaningful decisions based on a crummy photograph or what you glimpse before they dive into the water. So protuberant eyes versus low profile eyes. Facial markings on the Western pond turtle. They're speckled to marbled. Marmorata, Clemys marmorata or Actinimus marmorata, their Latin name means marbled turtle. So you get that nice marbling on their skin and on the shell, especially on the face. Whereas on a red-eared slider, they're named red-eared sliders because they traditionally have that red badge behind their eye, and they've got those stripes and the whorls. But as you can see on the right, that red ear disappears, and a lot of people think that if there's no red ear, then it must not be a red-eared slider. That's not the case. The coloration is just faded in some of those adult melanistic males. So you want to look for that. Front claws, Western pond turtles traditionally have short to medium length claws, whereas the claw on a male in particular slider can be really long, like Wolverine long. They can be exaggeratedly long, and we'll see that, I think, in some of the examples that we look at later on. Shell size, pond turtles are smaller. They rarely exceed 12 inches in length. That's shell, tip to tip. Whereas common sliders can greatly exceed 12 inches. So if your first impression is that was a really big turtle and you have a good sense of scale from where you're standing, that might point you toward a slider just straight out the gate. All right, we'll slide down here. Looking at the carapace of the two species, some individuals of a Western pond turtle have very drab, unremarkable markings, especially if they've been out in the sun and their shell has dried. It can be very nondescript. It can be covered in mud and silt. But in some cases, as that illustration, I think you guys can see my cursor here, this top left one, it can be a beautiful marbling that in some individuals really stand out. Likewise, on the red-eared slider, they can have gorgeous shells, gorgeous markings, but traditionally they can be a mix of green to yellow stripes, and they fade with age, especially with melanism. And you can see these are two darker individuals. Looking at the carapace appearance, a Western pond turtle on the left, sometimes you can see growth rings. Sometimes, like the example on the left, they can stack in a pyramid. That's not uncommon, but that's not traditional in every single turtle. Again, I said none of these are going to be absolute. Sometimes you can see the growth rings, but the growth rings can wear off over time, and some of them just aren't as apparent as others. But they're often more of a smooth-shelled turtle, whereas in a common slider, you're going to get opaque, chipped, peeling scoots. The keratin wears off and chips off. And you can see in the individual on the left significant wear, and they get kind of a wrinkly, dimpled look. That's very charismatic of sliders, but you can see a hint of that in Western pond turtle. So again, it's not 100% rule. But one of the diagnostics that we're willing to hang our hats on are the vertebral scoots. Now, there's one entry on iNaturalist that I'm not going to show you because it will confuse everybody. But there's one that the community is fighting back and forth over, and everyone has agreed on Western pond turtle except me. I think it's a slider because I'm looking at this mark. So even the community can disagree on identifications, and that's okay. We're trying our best. But the clues that we're looking for here is the vertebral scutes are the scutes, the shields that go down the spine, the back of the turtle, along the carapace. And the first front vertebral scute is the one, the ones that go around the perimeter are called marginals, and the ones on the back down the spine are called vertebrals. And you're looking for that join where the vertebral joins the marginal. And if it flares outward as you're facing the turtle's head, and it meets or exceeds, so you can see the join here, this line is going outside of the marginals, that should be 99.99% of the time a Western pond turtle. Whereas if you're looking at the common slider, they taper, they funnel inward, and they focus toward the head. So they're going to reduce, and they're going to fall inside of those marginal scutes, somewhere inside. Again, I can't say that this is 100%, but 99.99 is a pretty good clue, which means that 99% of the photos or the individuals you see won't show this marking, so you won't be able to rely on it. But that's a really good thing to look for. Looking at the plastron, the belly of the turtle, they are unmarked to irregularly marked. You can see that the spots are mottled and bounce back and forth. They're somewhat mirrored, but not 100%. They look like ink blots, inconsistent, imprecise. Whereas on the common slider, you get these regular, repeated mirror image. You get dots on either side. And also important to note, you can see those spotting on the underside of the carapace, the underside of the shell. And sometimes a good trick, if you can't see it precisely, you look at the water's reflection, and sometimes you can see those markings in the water's reflection, and that will give it away. but that's a good thing to look for on an individual as they're basking. And the next diagnostic that we feel pretty confident about are the rear marginal scutes. Remember, the marginals are the ones that go around the outer perimeter of the shell. And if you look in the rear of a Western pond turtle, they're relatively smooth. They might be crimped or have a little bit of a pinch where each of the marginal scutes join. It might be a slight scallop, but it's generally smooth. The impression you're going to get is it's just smooth all around. On most pond sliders, you're going to get serrations or notches, not only at the join, but inside of each one of those marginals. So if you see that serrated tooth-like, you know it's not a Western pond turtle. That's not something that we traditionally see. Limbs, again, like the head and the markings of the skin, you're going to get mottled greens, browns, yellows, and they're going to be infrequently striped. I do see things that look slightly striped in Western pond turtles sometimes, but 99% of the time that striping is because your eye is looking for patterns. It's not a traditional stripe. Whereas if you look at a common slider, you're going to get combinations of stripes and whorls, but they're going to be nice, long, traditional lines, again, except for those melanistic individuals. And lastly, behavior-wise, Western pond turtles, they flush pretty quickly when people approach. They might become acclimated in more urban areas, but even then, they're much more wary of humans and pets and other things that might endanger them. So they very rarely stack on each other. They do stack. Some of the video footage showed that, but it's uncommon and definitely not in pyramids. Uh, Whereas in common sliders, they do a traditional Superman pose where they'll stick all their limbs out in all four directions and they look like they're flying. Um, they flush less often, they're easily approached, and they will bask in giant masses. You can see that photo on the bottom right. It's just a giant mass of turtles, and they're stacked all over each other. So just to recap, you're always going to want to look for different combinations of these, whatever you can see, based on how the turtle is facing or what kind of photograph somebody gives you. But the two really big clues are that vertebral scute and the rear marginal scute. If you can get a good photograph or a good look at that with binoculars, you can probably make a pretty confident identification. All right. So that's the guide there, and it's linked on the Bay Nature article, and I think Leah said she's going to send out material afterwards, and we can share a PDF of that. And I hope people will circulate that, use it for trainings, whatnot. It's meant for the public to practice and to teach others. And I know, like, for example, the Marin Water Turtle Observer Volunteer Program, they regularly train their volunteers on how to distinguish between the two species. I know they have an upcoming training on March 1st. These kind of resources might be really helpful for opportunities like that. All right, so lastly, now that we've reviewed some of these key diagnostics, I'm going to turn it to iNaturalist. This kind of exercise is a perfect sandbox to apply what we've learned. Hopefully people were taking notes. There's no test. This is the test. We're just going to experiment and see how well we've learned. There's no wrong answers. It's okay to be wrong. I'm wrong all the time, and it's humbling when I get fooled, but I learn from each mistake I make, and I try to, hone my skills, and I'm just challenging you guys to do the same. And I also ask, when I bring these pictures up, the identification for iNaturalist is going to be right there on the top. You're going to want to take a look at it and cheat, and that's okay. But try to go into this with a blank slate. Try to just look at the pictures and not look at the ID. Assume that that is the first person to submit that photo, and they have no idea what they're talking about, and it could be as right as it is wrong. So we just want to go through each photograph and try to figure it out for ourselves. So I'll bring up iNat here. This one here. All right, so remember, clear your mind, Jedi mind trick. We've got a turtle up here, of course, like I warned you. You cannot see that vertebral scute. That's perfect. It's got a nice dark head. I can't tell if there's red or striping. And so as we do this, if you guys want to participate and make it a community effort, you can write in the chat and Leo will accumulate what you guys think and report back. And we can just see how well we're doing. And again, it's okay if we get it wrong. This is just for fun. And I'm gonna challenge you to identify the species, either native Western pond turtle or non-native slider, and then what key diagnostics gave you that hint. So take a look at this really quick, and I'm just gonna start in. Again, I don't see a red badge. I don't see striping. I can't see that first vertebral scoot, but I can see the underside of the shell, and I can look in the reflection and it mirrors that. And I am looking at the rear of the shell, and I see some definite serrations here. So I'm gonna walk you through these first ones. This is a pond slider. It's dark and it has the general appearance of a Western pond turtle, but there's enough clues there for us to know that it's a melanistic male and it's trying to trick us. So this pond slider, you can see someone has suggested it was a pond turtle in the community, did a little flip flop on there and brought it back to pond turtle. So now the next one, looking at this individual, I can't really see the head, so I don't see any facial striping on the skin, the neck. The claws look short to medium length. I'm looking here on the backside, and even though that's not the complete rear quarters, I have a little hint that it's smooth. And then I can see right here, that is the vertebral scoot right there, and this is the join, and it looks like it's outside of the marginal there where it lands. So this, to me, would be a Western pond turtle. But again, I warned you, none of these are going to be absolute, and the photos are never going to be as diagnostic as we'd like them to be. And the community agreed that this was a Western pond turtle, so that's good to know. And then here we have several turtles. This is not uncommon to have a bunch of turtles basking. Behaviorally, I see them basking individually. I can look at the rear marginal scoots of this individual, and I can see a portion of this one. This one is nice and clean. And actually, this is another point to make is just, I'm looking at all these collectively. It could be that there's a red-eared slider amongst pond turtles or vice versa. So don't always base it on one turtle. If there were two different species here, the reporter should split that into two different observations and say leftmost turtle, Western pond turtle, all the others are red-eared sliders, and have two different entries for that. And it's okay to recommend that if you were an iNaturalist and you were trying to sort them. Another clue I should point out is don't assume it's a red-eared slider because you're in an urban area. Don't assume it's a Western pond turtle because you're in a wild area. And don't assume that it is one thing because the other thing has never been reported there before. Always treat each individual that you're looking at as a clean slate and make an educated guess as to what you think it is. Try not to be biased by the data. All of that is contextual data, and you can use that to help guide your future identifications, but try to make each identification a solid one. So again, I'm looking at clean lines here. I can see the front vertebral scoot on this individual is landing outside right there. I can zoom it in a little bit, and you can see that it's landing outside. So I'm pretty confident that all of these individuals are Western pond turtles. Here's a gorgeous shell. It's got marbling and kind of a ray to it. You can see that first vertebral scoot lands on the outside of those first marginals. So without a doubt, just from those markings and from those two clues, I know it's a Western pond turtle. You can see that they're, kind of Rorschach blotches on the belly. Any others? So there, you can see a slight bump, but not a pronounced notch. That's just the seam between each of those marginal scoots. So don't be fooled by that. It could be scalloped, but it's not pronounced. So pretty confident that's a Western pond turtle. Here's a nice one. Look at those claws, really long. And then look at that that first vertebral. Of course, there's a wand of grass in the way. I told you, all these photos are always going to try to make this tricky. But here you can see that those lines are falling inside of those marginal scoots. So this is pretty assuredly a slider. All right, so now we can let the uh, community participate. I'm going to leave it up to you guys for a minute. I'm looking at this individual and just take a minute to try to figure out if you think this is a Western pond turtle or a common slider, and then what clues you might use to make that identification. All right. Leah, do you have any notes?
There's nothing in the chat so far. If anyone has
That's
any guesses or any notes, go ahead. Oh, we have one from someone saying Western pond turtle. Another person says claws look sharp. Another vote for Western pond turtle. Um, so there's two for Western pond turtle, one for claws look sharp. Would indicate. Okay, and then
yeah.
Western pond turtle because smooth marginal scute.
Yep.
Scute.
Okay, so the claws are tricky here. They do look longer than a short to medium, but I would say this is on the long end of medium. This otherwise looks like a Western pond turtle to me. Uh, I can barely see that line coming down, and it looks like it's outside of the marginal. The general appearance of the turtle looks like a Western pond turtle, but definitely those rounded rear marginal scutes. Um, and I can see the growth rings, but I don't see any dimpling on the shell. So generally, although this one has a little tricky factor here with the claws, I feel pretty confident this would be a Western pond turtle. So good guesses, everyone. Um, all right, how about this individual? This is a nice tricky one. So take a look at it and think carefully. I'll sort through the various pictures. Ah, see, a nice crummy photo to try to identify from, but every photo helps. And it's not a criticism of people's photography. Sometimes they're just really hard to photograph, or you only have an iPhone or a Android and you don't have a telephoto lens, or you can't get close enough. That's totally normal.
We have one vote for a faded slider.
Okay. So,
Someone else says Western pond turtle.
okay, I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
This one is a little on the fence, but if you look at the shape of the first vertebral, it generally flares outward. It's if it's not inside, it's just meeting the seam. So this is kind of that gray area where it's a judgment call and you're accumulating clues. The claws are on the shorter end. They're not excessively long. Um, and then all those nice round, clean marginal scutes. But I would argue that this is a tricky one. I'd feel pretty confident marking this as a Western pond turtle, but I would definitely take a second look before I made that identification. So, like I said, no wrong answers. All right. How about this individual? We don't have a lot of clues because it's a really dark photo and an odd angle, but there are two clues that I can see. Anyone brave enough to take a guess, Leah?
No messages yet in the chat.
That's okay.
Let's
Like I said, this is a tricky one. So what I'm looking at is the marginal coming down and it's landing at or outside of those. The vertebral is coming outside of those marginals there. So that's flaring outward toward the head. And then you can see a slight scallop, but generally it's a smooth rear marginal on this individual.
Mhm.
So pretty confident that this would be a Western pond turtle.
Yeah, we got some votes for Western pond turtle there and one for a slider, but most for Western pond turtle.
All right. And let's take a look at this individual. I see two nice diagnostic clues for me that would tell me what I think this is. Actually, three if I'm looking carefully. Any brave souls out there?
Three Western pond turtle. Four, I think.
All
Five.
right.
Five Western pond turtle votes.
So what I'm seeing here is the flared vertebral scute. It's meeting the seam right there. I can't see the claws here, but I can see the claw there enough to see that they look pretty short. And then the nice round rear marginals. That's a pretty good indicator. And this one is approaching what we might consider piebald. It's a genetic anomaly where they get kind of a yellowish markings on their shell. And in some of the males in the Western pond turtles, they get a very, very clean white neck. Males traditionally have a bare chin. They're clean shaven. They don't have any speckles. But this one has a pronounced marking that might be piebald. I'm not 100% sure, but those light markings are, they help me look twice at the individual. How are we doing on time, Leah? Do we want to do any more, or should we open it up to?
I think we have a lot of questions, so I think maybe we can transition now to questions.
Okay.
And yeah, but that was super fun. Let's see. Our first question comes from Rick Landman. Do you mind unmuting Rick and asking your question?
Sure. Great talk, Matthew. Thank you. I'm curious where the dividing line is between Northwest pond turtles and Southwest pond turtles now that they've ascertained some genetic subspeciation.
I would, rather than try to draw a line on a map for you, I would point you to some papers that draw that line. It's a little, I mean, the lines that have been drawn are very precise. I'm not going to pretend to remember it enough to give you that specific map verbally. There's the overlap is roughly in the Bay Area, and there is a little bit of admixing that they've recognized because, in all likelihood, both Native Americans and pioneers, when they came in and started harvesting them, definitely moved them around. There's records of them being moved, shipped all the way to Nevada. Individuals up in Oregon collecting turtles from the Klamath River and moving them down south to the Bay Area. And there was probably some collection in San Diego where they moved upward. So there's probably a little bit of admixing, but I can point people to a paper that will have that information. So if you're really interested, we can delineate that for you.
No, I think makes more sense. There's an admixture zone probably from the Carquinez Strait to the South Bay.
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy, and I don't want to do injustice to the work that Brad Schaefer and the other researchers did to draw that line. So I'll point you to a resource later.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Rick, and Matthew for your answer. And our next question is from Matt Weiser and Alexa Mergen. Do you mind unmuting and asking your question? I think it was about the threats of domestic dogs.
Yeah, we were just wondering if unleashed dogs in the habitat for these pond turtles are a stressor or a threat to them at all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine in urban areas it would stress out individuals. I have a feeling that some dogs, some retrievers probably pick them up if they can catch them and might run around with them. We very regularly find turtles that have damage to their shells, gnaw marks, turtles that are missing appendages. They're entirely hardy individuals and they can persist even though they're missing a limb or two. It's surprising but true. But yes, they probably are a threat, but not one of the bigger threats that they face. It probably, if there's an area with a lot of turtles, if the agency that oversees that land were to restrict pet access to those areas, it probably would help the population. Let's put it that way.
Cool. Thank you. And thanks for your question, Matt and Alexa. We have a question from Dan Rosenheim. Do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Thank you. I was wondering how many different kinds of turtles exist in the wild in Northern California.
That's a great question. Western pond turtles. So I'm using the phrase Western pond turtles as representative of the complex. The species was recently split into Northwestern and Southwestern. So, acknowledging that there's two turtles that you find regularly in Oregon, California, and then up in Washington, you do get the painted turtle that creeps in. There used to be a Sonoran mud turtle that was in a small portion of the Southern California near out in the vicinity of the Mojave. That population within California has since gone extinct or extirpated, meaning locally gone. So the western pond turtle is the only freshwater turtle that you should expect in California. And then there are little dribs and drabs of species whose ranges extend all the way out to the Pacific coast.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Dan. Our next question is from Harry. Harry, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Is that Henry you're looking at?
Henry, my apologies, Henry.
No, that must be me then. I was just wondering how far the female could go away from water to nest, and and I know the babies have to get back. So I was wondering, I was leading a walk in a park, and it's obviously quite a distance because we found a turtle making a nest right there. She's continued the entire time we walked and stood around and watched her. Once she started, she was going to finish. But I was just wondering what the distances were for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's more attention now. People are studying the nesting behavior on a regular basis now, more so than when I first started trying to track turtles in a in a tree blind. But the average distance that, at the very least, they're going 300 to 400 feet away from a water body to nest. They're trying to leave the floodplain because western pond turtles are unique in that their shells are hard shelled rather than leathery like other turtles. And so if they're exposed to water, they could explode and it would destroy the nest. So they're always going to be above the high water mark in dry soil, well drained on embankments. They'll nest in roads, levee tops. And yes, you're right. Once they start nesting, they are driven to complete it. But if you ever come across a turtle on land, you always want to just make a point to walk away and make a scene. Be silly when you do it. Say, "Hi, turtle, I'm walking away. Keep doing your thing." And it sounds absurd, but if you sneak away or you try to hide behind a tree or a bench and watch them, they will know and they will just abandon what they're doing altogether and give up. If you make a scene and you walk away, then they'll keep going and they'll be able to complete that nest. So that's a little trick.
Thanks for the tip and thanks Henry for your question. Henry, yeah, for your question. And then Carolyn, I think, is our next question asker. Carolyn, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Yeah, actually, I think I'll ask my second question. How evolutionarily related are the sliders and the western pond turtles?
That's a great question, and I don't know. I don't know how they are connected. So I'm gonna punt on that one. I don't know.
Okay, we'll look it up. Thanks.
I'd have to research that.
And our next thing, thanks for your question, Carolyn. Our next question is from Anne, and Anne actually sent an attachment of a photo of a slider in the of a turtle in the chat. Anne, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Are you talking? I'm not sure if it's me, but I did post a picture that we aren't sure which it is, and I just thought, what the heck? I'll throw it up there and see what you guys think. It's from an area where we believe there's western pond turtles. It's in Hayward by the shoreline at a former golf course that's a threatened site. So I was curious what you think.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photo. It's a tricky one. It's a great question. My gut instinct is that it's a male western pond turtle. I
Okay.
don't see any indicators of it being something else, but the only thing that I'm concerned about is if you look in the reflection, I can see a regular repeating of spots along the underside of the marginals that makes me question that identification. Ultimately, if you think there's a turtle out there and you're concerned about it, you should definitely recruit someone with a good telephoto lens and see if you can get a better photo, because it would be really important to document that. It's great. Yeah, it's a great question.
Great. Thank you for the advice. That's a good one. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Anne. Our next question is from Gay. Gay, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
No problem. I was just wondering if they interbreed or crossbreed.
Actually, that's a great question, and I think any herpetologist or naturalist that's been out there that's been challenged by a melanistic slider has thought at one point this must be a hybrid.
That's
I
the
know
word
I,
I'm looking for,
yeah,
hybrid.
I know I've asked that question multiple times when I get that one stumper that I cannot figure out. And other
Right.
people have asked that question too. But to the best of my knowledge, no one has been able to confirm that there's been any interbreeding between the two species up until now. And 99.9% of the time, it's those melanistic male sliders that are tripping us up. And like I said, all turtles are variable. So just because that first vertebral scoot is a pretty good, indicator, like I said, if you go and look online, there's one turtle that's got like 30 entries of all the turtle experts going back and forth trying to figure out what it is. And I'm taking the low ground and I'm disagreeing with them despite being part of the unpopular opinion. So,
So you're saying you never know.
you never know. But it's never been documented yet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Gay. Our next question is from Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Yeah, I think the question, I think I asked a couple of them, but the one I'm most concerned about is I live in a community that has several golf courses and several ponds, and there are turtles in there. And I'm concerned about what the management of those facilities might be using to maintain the golf courses that would have impact on the turtles, and what you can say about that and what you would recommend I say about that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, although it's not a natural habitat, obviously the turtles are occupying it. I guess the biggest question would be whether or not it's the native turtle or a non-native turtle. Without sounding callous, if it's the non-native turtle, you know, perhaps the concern is a little less escalated because they don't belong there in the first place, and we wouldn't want them to escape out into the natural areas. There are rescues that will take in non-natives. Uh, and it's always the guess that if you're in an urban area, it's probably people releasing them. But if you did have a native turtle in there, it would be good to know that. Um, and maybe like you could reach out to your local fish and game office to see if they knew it was there. And if there are some particularly averse management practices, starting the conversation with either the land managers or the agencies about protecting the native turtles if they're there. It's worth a discussion. But if the turtles are there and they look healthy, then maybe that's more important, that there is a little refuge in an urban area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for your question. And our next question is from Laura Baker. Laura, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
First, thanks. That's a great talk. Really wonderful to get this information. We have a couple of ponds. We live in northwestern Sonoma County on a rural property, and we've been trying to find someone who can advise us how to manage our ponds. It's pretty clear to me that something needs to change. The water quality may not be great, but we can't find anyone. And we've tried the resource conservation districts, but there just doesn't seem to be that kind of expertise that we've been able to tap into. Can you advise us?
I mean, I'm always happy to give you some counsel if you want to reach out to me separately. Generally speaking, one way to enhance a pond in the first place is to put some kind of basking substrate out there, whether it's a untreated old power pole or a downed log or something. You could put something floating out in the middle, and it would give them a natural area. Well, not necessarily a natural, but a place that you could easily go and revisit over and over again and scan that area with binoculars to see, hey, how many turtles are out there. That's a nice clue to begin with. Like, oh, we have 26 turtles and they seem to be doing really well out there, right? So giving them a nice place to bask is a really simple thing you can do. And then beyond that, I know Oregon, their natural resource agency has a lot of handbooks and guidance that's coming out on a regular basis on how to manage lands and ponds. So if I can find that information for you, I'd be happy to share it with you, or you can do a search yourself. I can probably ask a few people and get that information for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think that's a great question to end on. I'm sorry to those of you who've entered questions, but it is the top of the hour, so I think we'll probably wrap up there. But I just really thank you all so much for coming today to today's talk, and biggest thank you of all goes to Matthew for sharing your expertise, sharing your film, sharing your guide, and just doing that fun activity with everybody. Yeah, it was a great talk. And does everyone mind just unmuting and we can all thank Matthew, and I can count us down from 3, 2, 1, and then we'll say thank you. Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, Matthew. Great job.
It's a kumbaya moment there, I tell you.
Matthew, do you have a way for us to contact you?
Yeah, if you look me up online, you'll be able to track me down. I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay. Thank
Cool.
you.
I just wanted to mention really quickly, thank you so much for the talk. This was amazing. I work for Marin Water, and I just wanted to say I put a note in the chat, but for those who didn't see, we do have that Turtle Observer program that Matthew mentioned earlier. I put the link to sign up in the chat, but you can also go to Marin Water's website and navigate to the watershed and volunteer page calendar to sign up as well. So yeah, training for that is on March 1st, and it's a really cool program. You help us monitor Western pond turtles on Mount Tam. So hope to see some of you guys out there.
Best of both worlds.
Thanks so much, Annie. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your day. Hope to see you at another event soon.
Thanks. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.